Welcome to the Red Room. Our guest today is Griffith Morgan, the author of the documentary Secrets of Blackmoor. Welcome, Griffith.
Thanks for having me on. It's exciting to finally meet you guys.
Thanks for coming. Okay, let's start by asking you, how did the idea for this documentary?
Oh, the documentary. The documentary started. Well, it's a long, weird story, but basically I got back into role-playing games, and you start, Chris, who I was doing other film projects with, his brother had a group, and we also had a side business. We were doing like an internet social media company startup, and Bob, our other partner in that, was in that group as well. And I mean, it's kind of strange because the group was comprised of a bunch of people that were strangely interconnected. And one of the players in the group, when I joined it, it turned out that he was one of the people I knew when I was about 13 years old. And my first experiences with Dungeons and Dragons was playing a computer game on a computer system called the Plato system. And they had a D&D game in 1974 or 5. And we would play that. And so I thought D&D was a computer game originally. I had never seen paper D&D, and Mike was in the game group, and he actually invited me to play paper D&D, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And I said, no, I'm going to the computer center. I'll talk to you later. And it's just these guys sitting around a milk crate with these little books and dice and stuff. And I didn't know what it was. I was just like, oh, that looks stupid. I'm going to go play on the computer, right? So so like it's like 30 years later or something like that, 35 years later, I got into that group. And so it caused me to go on the internet and start exploring what other people are playing at the time, which their group was playing Pathfinder. I think it was pre-5e D&D. So Pathfinder was sort of the logical progression from 3e and 4e, I guess. I guess it's 3e, but it was a good progression beyond 4e. And so I played with them a little bit, and I don't know, I just got on the internet and I got into some original D&D group and was chatting with people, and I was all happy. And I didn't realize how hostile and toxic it's a nasty place out there on the internet now. And it was Gary Gygax's birthday, and everybody was like, yay, Gary's a genius. He did everything. He's like, I got sick and I prayed to Gary, and like a saint, he like sent energy down from heaven and healed me, and Gary is divine. And so I just literally typed in something like, yes, but what about Dave Arneson? And like, I didn't know what was going to happen. And the next thing I know, people are in there and they're swearing at me. They're like, you don't know what you're talking about. I was there.
That still happens, right?
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
noticed
And
the first time.
the people that were insulting me were, I have to say, well, some of the people that were insulting me were people that, I think Jim Ward was in there insulting me, which I think is hilarious, because if I met Jim, I'd be like, Jim, let's do some gaming, right? I don't care. So that got me a little fired up as to just like, well, this is strange. And then I started getting these messages. So I got curious about the fact that people were so angry, because when you see a fire like that, you know that there's some underlying mechanism going on in the social group. And so I started getting messages from this guy anonymously, and I didn't know who the hell he was. And he kept saying, no, you're right. And then he'd be like, well, they all know who I am. I can't post these things, but if you post this link, you'll see what happens. And so he was giving me all these links to resources on the web, and I would post them as a proxy for the war. And it felt like it lasted 2 weeks. I think it was 2 days maybe. But by talking to him, I started to feel like, okay, so I got this weird guy. I got everybody on the internet hates me. I have this weird guy that's goading me into putting things on there to make these people hate me. So I'm the proxy in the war here. Finally, it made me feel paranoid. It was just kind of a weird situation. So finally I asked the guy who he was, and he said, oh, I was Dave Arneson's webmaster. I was friends with Dave Arneson. And then he started talking, and he brought in, I don't know if you do any research on the Blackmoor campaign at all, but at the time, Blackmoor Mystara forum it's Havard's forum, along with, there was a guy named Raphael on there too. And so he put me in touch with them, and the four of us created this sort of research group where we were talking secretly about, it was called Circle Blackmore. And it was just this secret Blackmore group that talked about what was really going on with it. And which is hilarious because gamers love a conspiracy. Like we love, it's like you're exploring, you're going into these.
It's a real-time adventure.
Yeah, exactly. You go down into these dungeons and caverns, but we want to have the emotional dungeon and cavern. And so we get these conspiracies going about everybody hates you or whatever.
This Blackmoor campaign was it really famous? I had never heard about it until recently.
It's the first fantasy campaign. It's the first time. Well, I'll go into that, but it is the oldest fantasy campaign, and it's still
okay.
Going.
Just to make it known, I am not really knowledgeable about the origins of the role-playing games.
Really, I'm going to stop the record now. Okay. I'm joking. That's enough. We're done.
I started playing in '89.
Okay.
And I started playing with Dungeons and Dragons, of course. Well, of course, not really, of course, but usually that's what happens. But I didn't play Dungeons for much more. I played it about 2 years, and then most games I played from then on were '90s games.
Right.
So I never had that curiosity to search what was the origins of the hobby. I was playing Vampire and Cult and Call of Cthulhu. Well, Call of Cthulhu
right.
isn't that's
90s, right?
Yeah,
it's like
that's
91
probably
it's earlier, 89 maybe.
There were earlier editions, the 80s, but the one I was playing was a '90s edition. So everything else I played from then on was more recent. So I never had a curiosity.
But you knew that they come from war games or board games or strategy games.
I know that I have that information, but I never. Well, for example, I never heard about Blackmoor and the other Mystara.
Right.
And so, well, I've heard about it, but I didn't know. Just for me, it was just names.
Right.
Not much information until I saw the documentary, of course. Now I know.
Right. Now you know all about it, or you know a lot more about it. There's a lot to know. I don't even know everything.
That feels like your documentary feels like a first part of something that you were going to expand on. Is that correct?
Yeah. So back to I just wanted to finish my story. I know it was really long, but so it turns out that Dave Arneson had tried to make a documentary, and it was going to be called Dragons in the Basement, and so they started talking. Kevin wanted to make a movie, and I was like, you do realize I'm a filmmaker. And so I started doing a lot of research. I spent about 6 months doing research, and then I went and talked to my buddy Chris, and we're kind of weirdos. We just like to do cool stuff, and we're both into making movies. And so it's like, well, what should we do? And Chris said, let's just go to the Twin Cities and shoot, and we'll just see what happens. So we went up and we spent 10 days shooting in the Twin Cities, and Kevin had given me Dave Arneson's personal. It was like an Excel spreadsheet of everybody in the game business, basically from the 70s through the 2000s. He died in 2009. So it was basically a list of everybody that was significant in the game industry through that time period that he had contact with. He had
died recently when you did the documentary?
He had died, well, I guess if we started in 2012, it would have been 3 years earlier. I mean, it's kind of sad, Gary died in, I think, 2008, and I think he died a lot younger than he should have. He was about 10 years older than Arneson. Arneson was, here comes my cough. Hang on a second. I'm trying not to kill you with coughing. Arneson was probably like, I forgot how it works out. It's like 62 maybe when he passed away.
So, yes.
I mean, I'm 58
so. Around
now.
60, yeah, 60.
Yeah. So he still had, if he hadn't contracted cancer, he would still be doing game stuff. And that's kind of one of the fascinating things about him, though, is that he is a little bit different from Gary in that Gary kind of went into a retirement, whereas when Arneson passed away, he was teaching gaming down in Florida, and oh God, you got to excuse me. This cold I hope I don't have the Omicron thing because, well, it's a cold. You know, if it's Omicron, it's a cold. If it's a cold, it's a cold. But he was still working on games, and I got a lot of stuff from the guys. So we went to interview these guys, and then once they got to know us and trust us, and then we worked for another 6 years after that. So 6.5 years of working, kind of, you know, communicating with people, doing interviews, editing, reviewing footage, researching, getting in touch with people that weren't in the film that had archive materials. But what's astounding is that one of the guys we kind of put together this other research team of people that were archaeologists, and one guy's like this kind of like forensic computer data analyst guy. We put together this small group, and one of them just recently did a small paper. I think it's on his webpage, and it's just a list of what Arneson published and what he was working on. And if you go through the list of what he was working on, you realize that throughout his entire life, he was working on game design, and he had stuff going the whole time. And that's one of the myths that came up about Arneson, was that everybody in Lake Geneva, they were saying that Arneson was lazy and didn't do anything. And it's like, no, he was working on a lot of stuff all the time. And you can see it in what remains, because they're just piles of paper of stuff, notes and printed games and things.
Did he publish any of those?
He published a lot of it. There are entire, like when we finally, you have to understand the Blackmoor bunch, because of all the drama that happened around the schism between Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. The Blackmoor bunch, being from Minnesota, they were more laid back, and they just kind of said, okay, we're just going to keep gaming and we're not going to deal with this stuff, right? And on top of that, you have Arneson's daughter, who just was like, you know, I don't know, I don't want to have anything to do with all this drama. And so she kind of went into the background. And so, like, it took me 2.5 years to get an interview with Malia. And it's just because she thought I was just some other jerk that wanted to talk about Dave and waste her time. And then you talk to the people in the group, and about half the time I would call somebody and ask them if they could do an interview, and they would say, like, hang on, I'll call you back. I got to call Malia and see if it's okay. So it's sort of like dealing, I always refer to it as the Blackmoor Mafia, is that you never get to meet the boss, but everybody works for the boss. And if you want to even deal with the people who work for the boss, they're like, I got to check with the boss to see if it's okay. And anyway, I'm losing my place. Where were we on that? You were asking me something specific.
How you started to do the...
That was the first question, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, how we got into the documentary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really convoluted thing. And then once we were doing it, I mean, there were other documentaries. I don't know if you followed the other documentaries at all.
Nope.
I won't name them because I might say something bad, and if I could, you know, I don't want to get into any.
Well, I know there are other documentaries, but I never saw them.
They got funded on Kickstarter there was one that got about $500,000. Poof, nothing there. Another one, a spin-off, you know, Dragons in the Basement, and these ones, there are at least 3 or 4 that were on Kickstarter that never went anywhere, and to the tune of, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Chris and I mostly self-funded. We did a Kickstarter. We got, you know, about 1/3 of the money that we needed from that. Most of it was out of our own hides. And so when you're on the fire and you know, I gotta get this done or nothing's gonna happen and we're gonna be out $100,000 or something, that kind of goads you into finishing the project. And then on top of it, we had promised the Blackmoor bunch that we were making a movie, and we, you know, I feel pretty honorable with my word. And so if I say I'm going to do this film about you, I have to complete it. I can't not complete it. So, and that's part of the whole getting to know the Blackmoor bunch. They're very honorable.
That was the hardest part, right? Getting their confidence.
Well, and you get their confidence.
That was a bit hard, right, at the beginning.
Yeah, well, it's you get their confidence, but there's also the issue of you realize that once you've earned their confidence, that it's a two-way street, right? And the only way to earn their confidence is to be honorable, because they are honorable. And so it's an unwritten contract. Once I started working on the movie, I mean, I'm sure Chris felt the same way. It was as if we'd signed a contract and we had to complete it. So yeah, that's kind of how the movie happened. I mean, I just say, go watch the movie if you want to know what it's about. It's just about, it's just about how role-playing games happen. I would say there's a community of people that do a lot of research on role-playing games, and most of the gamers are very sort of obtuse, that are historians, and they're very focused on what is found within the rules of these games. And so they look inside, they're looking in rule books, and most of what happens in a role-playing game doesn't happen in the rules. At least in an old school, like a free Kriegspiel type game. Yeah. There are no rules. You just say, okay, I'm going to go over and listen at the door. Well, maybe there's a rule for that. Okay, well, I'm going to drag a chair over and prop it up against the door so that nobody can come through that door. That's not in the rules. I'm going to, while that door is propped open, we're going to go do something, there's a pit. There was a plank in the other room. We're going to drag the plank in and throw it over the pit so we can get over the pit. That's not in the rules. And so that's that whole really seat of your pants, free Kriegspiel, rules free type of game. And you cannot, that doesn't appear anywhere in any rule. And that's what role playing is,
That's one of the interesting things on the documentary, how they were playing war games and they start introducing things that were not supposed to be on the rules and adding their rules and morphing it eventually into a role play.
Yeah, see, that was another thing. A lot of the researchers, they wanted to say, like, only something that is like D&D is a role-playing game. So that doesn't really give you like a measuring stick to say what came before that brings us up to D&D. And so my approach was to say, well, if we see even the tiniest amount of role playing, which you see in the, like what you're talking about with the war games, then we have role playing, and we're just going to call it role playing. And then we can start to measure the accumulation and the scope of how much role play we have in the game, and create sort of a pathology for what's going on. We can trace it then. And so that's kind of one of the things that's really different about the movie, is that, I really wanted to establish some sort of a paradigm for measuring, is this role playing? Is this not role playing?
So when did it start being role playing and stopped being a war game?
Well, I think that the idea of defining it is really is difficult. And so I would say that even if you look back at say Totten's Strategos, and he was, it's the 1880s, it's between the Civil War and whatever war comes next. There's like a 40-year period that the United States isn't attacking anyone, which is sort of a weird historical moment because we're always doing something. But I would say that Totten's Strategos definitely has role play elements in it. And nobody really knew, back then it was more about simulating the fog of war and creating uncertainty and having to, and since it was a training method for military officers, the idea was to, instead of playing a game which would be deterministic, where you don't even use dice, it's like, if your unit moves over here and it attacks this kind of unit, this is how many losses you're going to get. This is the result. It's like a game of chess. And that's not very useful in training officers to deal with the unexpected. You want your officers maybe to be more flexible. So when you introduce these fog of war elements, now you don't know what's going to happen. Anything can happen on the battlefield, and real history has proven that, right?
What makes this Blackmoor special besides being the part of the origin of role-playing games? It's the length of the campaign. Is it really important?
Well, what is significant? I mean, Blackmoor, it's complicated because Gary and Dave were talking, and I didn't really go into the details of what was going on in that time period, that they were starting to explore. They wanted to explore medieval battles, and they wanted to do like a big campaign where everybody had their little domain, and the domains might create alliances, and then they'd have bigger battles between factions in alliances. And so Gary had been working on this thing since he was a kid, which was this Greyhawk world. And he talked to Dave, and he from what I understand, what I've been told, he spoke to Dave on the phone and he described the world setting to him. And he just said, pick an area to use as your own. And there was this really bad area that was just swamps and marshes, and it just wasn't a very pleasant place. And Dave Arneson picked that to place his Blackmoor, and as a campaign game. And the reason for that, I think, also is that if you look at maps of Blackmoor, it's full of waterways. And Dave Arneson is a huge naval warfare fan. And so he wanted to conduct naval battles along with the land battles. So if you look at the map that he created for the original Blackmoor map and the ones that came out later, there are these huge waterways going all through the land. It's like the highways through the landscape. And so, yeah, that's just, half of it is going to be naval warfare instead of just land-based warfare. And so Dave created his part of this military campaign. It was like they were starting to get into this military role playing. Here I go again. God, I hate having a cough. God, I feel like I sound like a professor when I talk about this stuff, like lecturing. But Dave did that, but then David Wesley had also done these Brownstein games, and Dave Arneson and David Wesley were trading off being referees for the Brownsteins because Wesley wanted to play too. It's like, I've invented this cool game and I don't get to play it. So he and Arneson were trading off, and then Dwayne Jenkins came in and he did his Brownstone, which I don't know enough about it. And unfortunately, Dwayne, he had a stroke before we interviewed him. And so, doing his interviews, our interviews when we would do the movies, some of them, they would generally go between 3 and 4 hours each interview. And most people got interviewed twice at least. So it's a lot of interview time. And so if you're struggling with something like recovering from a stroke, our interviews were pretty grueling, and we had to cut them a little short with him because he just would get exhausted, and he needed to go take a nap or something. But he couldn't really remember much of what he had done in the game. So that's the other interesting thing, is that if you watch the section on Brownstein, the person who knows the most about Brownstein was Greg Svensson. And he didn't even play in the game. He just watched, and so he just talks about how fascinating it was to watch them play. So we have this accumulation of this role play style, but I think it's Arneson that really shifts it into, I think Brownstein is its own thing, and it is a full-on role playing game. It has a different purpose behind it. And the purpose is to put players in opposition or in union in opposition to other players, so that you create a very dynamic social game that can happen in 8 hours or something, and about 8 hours probably for a real one. He does them in 4 hours at conventions, but usually they don't finish up very well. He kind of has to wrap it up. But so that was that style, but it was Arneson who really proposed doing this style that was the first person perspective, where you have the referee and the referee is telling you what reality is, and you have this recursion. So reality is like this, but I changed something, and so now reality is like this, and then I changed something else and reality is now like this. So reality is constantly changing, and we're doing this thing where you're kind of checking in. It's like, okay, you left the door open, right? Like, that's your referee sort of cueing you to say, like, yeah, that's what our reality is, that the door is still open. Okay, we're going to go forward. You look down the passage and you see a mist, and in the distance you can see something glowing, and this glowing thing starts to take on form, and you realize it's moving toward you. What do you want to do? And then that's the other, that's the really relevant cue, is I have described the state of reality, and it's in a condition, a fixed condition at a certain point, and now you get to interject what you want to do, which might change the reality. So that's the Arneson genius right there, is to create that back and forth. I always use the computer term of recursion, like a Fibonacci sequence, where you take what was before and what is now, and then you produce a new what is now, and then you take what is before the now, and you just keep cycling through, and it keeps changing the value, generating itself. Yeah, so that's one thing that Arneson created. The other thing that he created very early on is the concept of the dungeon. Everybody plays in dungeons. I don't care who. I see a lot of kids now complaining, well, dungeons are bad or something. It's like, yeah, but most of the modules are set in dungeons.
Coffee shops are better.
Coffee shops are better, yeah. Go to a coffee shop. Yeah, so he created the dungeon concept for a game, and that's astounding. Combining with the idea of this reality that is constantly mixing and changing based on the player's behavior and based on what the referee knows ahead of time. And what's even more astounding is that, see, a lot of historians will refer to Arneson's first dungeon game as just a miniatures game because it was a competitive game. And so what happened was the Balrog, the wizard and his Balrog friend, took something from the Baron of Blackmoor and went down, escaped into the dungeon. And Greg and a bunch of guys were hired as just footmen to go down into the dungeon and get this thing back. And two of the players, I think it was Kurt Cry and John Sukup, were the bad guys. And they were down in the dungeon, and they were playing against the players going down into the dungeon. So I assume that Arneson was probably communicating to them, you know, your sentries are running back and reporting that there's a troop of soldiers over in this part of the dungeon. What do you want to do? And they were saying, well, we're going to send up, you know, a troop of 10 orcs with spears over there. And but I don't think it was being played as a miniatures game. I think it was being played as a kind of a double blind parallel RPG D&D game, like you know, when you get a split party, you know, it can be played as a double blind thing where each side has to leave the room while the other side plays. It's kind of a pain, right? But only in this instance they were against each other. And so that's astounding because this is the very first dungeon adventure, and he's gone to the extent of creating an extremely complex scenario for the players to play. They're taking turns going out of the room. And then on top of that, the very first session, Arneson tells the guys that they have to go into the laundry room. It was a long room in the basement with the washer and dryer. They have to go in there and they need to line up the way they are marching through the dungeon. And then he screams and turns off the light. And then he turns it on and he says, okay, everybody freeze, you know, that's where you are. This is what happened. And so it's the very first LARP game. It's like a live action adventure. I mean, it's astounding that he had the creativity to come up with. I mean, you've got three things right there. If that isn't enough on one game session, that just explodes into this new game style. I don't know what else to say. You know, I could probably. I mean, those are the first ones that come to mind. There's probably even more. You know, the dungeon map concept of the map is a rule for a game, right? People never talk about the map being a rule, but we don't even need to explain to each other that you can't walk through stone or you cannot walk through a doorway if it is not open. So it's sort of a self-explanatory rule when you have a dungeon map, where you can go and where you can't go. And then on top of that, you have notes that the referee has of what you will run into when you get there. That's astounding as well as a creation of rule for a game, because until that point, I think maybe Clue had I don't know, did you have Clue in Portugal? It probably would have a different name.
Yes.
I don't know.
I think we use the Spanish name, right? Yeah.
Cluedo?
Cluedo.
It's a Spanish word, but probably it came from Spain. I don't know.
Yeah.
In Portuguese, it would be another name. So
It
I don't
has,
know.
but it's a board game. You're moving around on the board. You're not imagining that. You're not looking
Yes.
at a map and saying, okay, we're going to go over here. And there's a door over here. So we're going to, send the thief up to listen, make sure the thief checks the passage in case there are pits or traps while he goes up there. Things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty amazing. I'm pretty excited to be sort of the voice of Arneson, to just reveal to people how significant what he did is. And at the same time, I'm tired of, can we say something nice about Gary? Yeah, Gary was a genius in his own right. When you get two geniuses together, you get a synergy, and you get 10 times, 100 times more genius going on than if you just have two geniuses alone. Can't we just agree that Dave and Gary are both geniuses, and together they created an amazing thing?
The documentary doesn't go much into the connection between the Gary and Dave. What happened? How did they met?
Well, I think we talk a little bit about that, because
Yeah, a
they
bit,
met
a bit.
in
Yeah.
1969. They met in person in the Twins in Lake Geneva for Gen Con 2. I'm not sure. They might have been writing letters a little bit before then, but Arneson, I think after the fact, people are going to look at who was the famous person that Arneson was writing letters to, right? But Arneson was writing letters to everyone, and Gary was writing letters to everyone. It isn't until after they become the guys that created Dungeons and Dragons that it's like, oh, this is important. They're talking to all these wargamers all over the world. There are infusions of ideas coming from England. We know that Arneson was writing letters to, I'm pretty sure, Featherstone, and I forgot the other guy's name, but there are a couple significant British wargamers that were doing similar ideas. There was one thing, if you look for Hyboria, the Hyboria campaign, I forgot who did that. I'm bad with names. I don't remember these things. I can remember images, but I do not remember words and names very well, and dates, which is ridiculous if you're going to be a historian, right? But yeah, they were people all over the world were doing this thing, but they sort of arrived at a threshold of they needed to let go of preconceptions and
I googled
and
it. Tony
paradigms.
Bath. Tony Bath, is that the name?
Oh,
I was
Tony Bath. Yeah, I think it was Tony
I was
Bath that did
googling it.
Yeah, Bath. Bath and Featherstone and their groups were very significant. Even excuse me, Bill Hoyt, who's in the movie, he had relatives in England, and he goes over, and I think it was Featherstone whoever lived in Brighton, he had relatives in Brighton, and so one of those significant wargamers lived in Brighton, and word got out that this kid from America was interested in war games. So it's like his first war game experience is with one of the world-renowned war game designers and writers. And then he goes back to the Twin Cities, and he sees an article about you see it in the movie. It's pictures in this article in the newspaper. And so that's how he hears about Wesley and their group. And he goes over and starts hanging out with them, like around, would have been like, I think 65 or so. But yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people were frustrated because the movie, you kind of, you make a movie and you want to sell the movie. So if we just said Secrets of Blackmoor, you didn't know what Blackmoor was at all, right? Why would you watch that movie? So we debated what to put underneath it, the true origin of role-playing games. So finally it was just like, let's just throw on the true history of Dungeons and Dragons, and which is the true early history of Dungeons and Dragons. And people wanted to know more about Gary and what happens at TSR later on. But for me as a researcher, all I'm interested in is the creation of ideas. And really, once Dungeons and Dragons is published, the concept is done. Everything else is just I don't know. It's like the invention of the car. Once they've invented the car, it doesn't matter if you paint it green or you paint it blue. It's still a car, And so all the addition of monsters and different books and whatever, it's just another painting of coat on the same basic concept, right?
What are you playing now?
What am I playing?
Yeah, or game mastering. Which game do you use?
I've been, well, I really want to play some more games. My weekly thing I run it. It's hard, almost, I can't say I run it, but I worked really hard to organize a really old computer gamer group. We're the oldest computer gamers in the history of the planet. And we meet Sunday nights to play as far as like a combat group game. And we play this old game called Empire, which I first played it maybe in 75. It's a multiplayer Star Trek game. And so that's my big focus, is just playing Empire, because it's still such a compelling design. It's such an incredibly good game, even though the graphics are 8-bit graphics on a 128 by 128 grid. So that's kind of my primary focus, is just playing Empire with the guys. I'd like to do a documentary on it, actually, maybe see if I can get funding through Kickstarter to do a small documentary on Empire, because we're dying. We lost one of our best players of pancreatic cancer like 5 years ago. It was just tragic.
So what's the game about?
It's a Star Trek. If you look up Plato computer game and then Empire, you will see there are videos, and there's a big Wikipedia page on it. That's my real focus. I'm kind of more focused on wargaming than role-playing games. The idea of how role-playing games and war games are connected is really fascinating to me. The idea of playing a war game where you have limited knowledge and fog of war, and you have, you're on a team, but if you don't get a message to somebody to do something at exactly the right time, it might mean that you die because you didn't have reinforcements right there with you. And I do that, and then I also do Tonisborg. I run Tonisborg games sometimes. I'm going to run one next Sunday. I do these. I just, getting a game organized is such a pain in the ass. You're like, can everybody play Saturday? Even my house group, it's like, who can play Saturday? And so, my wife needs me to like clean the garage. I can't, my boyfriend wants to go see a movie. I can't do that. So I'm just doing this thing where I pop onto Twitter at random times, and I'll just be like, I'm going to run a game in an hour. If you want, I'll send you a link to the Zoom, and we're going to play in an hour. Do you have 2 to 4 hours that you can play some D&D with me? And the first time I did it, I got 3 players, and we had an amazing game. I posted that on YouTube. If you look up, what is the name? I think it's under the Fellowship of the Thing is the YouTube page. And I think the best way to find it is like Blackmoor live play, Tonisborg. You'll get a YouTube video or 2. And I need to finish editing those. I had a lot of computer problems recently, so I was kind of in a limbo where I couldn't get any work done. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And Tonisborg is, as everybody.
Since you mentioned that, there's a second printing coming, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
It was a book we did. Greg Svensson again. He's, Blackmoor is really, in a certain way, the tale of the great Svenny, who was a knight in Blackmoor, and so he really drove a lot of the story, because all of the people playing with him, he was kind of leading the group in a certain way. Not that it's not a social game, and that he would, it's not like he's the boss of bosses or whatever, but anyway, he got a copy of D&D in 1973 before it was published. And it was just a printout. It didn't have any art or anything. And it's hilarious, because I interviewed him and I said, you kept that, right? And he said, no, I threw it away when I got my D&D books. And I was just like, oh, Greg, you could sell that and move to Tahiti. You can just never do anything else again except for like drink margaritas in Tahiti and complain about the heat. But he made a dungeon, and his dungeon was called Tonisborg. And that was Blackmoor was a very collaborative game. Arneson was very open to, if a player had an idea for a rule, they would try it. And he kept this black notebook, and he would just write the notes in the black notebook. And so what you see is, I don't know if you like one of the characters, Pete Gaylord was the first person to play a wizard. when they started Blackmore, there are pictures in there of when I talk about Brownstein, you see some cities set up on the table on the brown paper. Do you remember that in the movie?
Yes.
We don't know if those are Blackmore city settings or if those are Brownstein city settings. They're something, but when Arneson first set up Blackmore, he actually had all these HO scale model train buildings, and the castle that he used is the same castle they used for Brownstein University. It just served dual purpose. And he set up the town, and then there was a part of the area which was might have been the Elfwood originally, but they had these trees that were model train trees. Okay, so there's my camera. It's really dark there. Here, model train trees. There we go. You see those little fruits on the tree?
Yes.
Okay. So what happened was that the town was set up and the fruits kept falling off. And Pete Gaylord suggested, it was like, these are magical super berries, and they're the size of basketballs for little, they're like, or maybe the size of your head if you were like an HO scale person, right? And so, or somehow between Arneson and Gaylord, they came up with the idea of the super berries. And he would collect these super berries in the magical forest. And when they go on dungeon adventures and he had to cast a spell, he would crack open a super berry right as he cast the spell, and it would make the spell more powerful. So if he cast like a first level spell, it would be like a fourth level spell. And so he'd have a bag full of maybe 10 super berries, and it was how he could enhance his magical abilities was with the super berries. And that was just something they came up with because there's these little fruit falling off these plastic and foam trees, right? And so, yeah, I was always very collaborative like that. And then because Arneson was the only dungeon master, and he was running a Napoleonic campaign at the same time, which had somewhere up to 50 players in it. And it was modeling the entire planet during the time of Napoleon. So you had the Americas, you had the Caribbean, you had the East Indies, you had Europe, everything. So he's doing that, and he's running Blackmore, and his players are demanding that he run Blackmore games all the time. And he's got one guy that works as a security guard, and he goes to work. And if you're a security guard, you have nothing to do. You just walk around and like, okay, nobody's taking anything. I'll just sit there. I'm going to sit here. So he'd call up Dave and he'd say, Dave, I'm ready to play. So they would adventure in the dungeon over the phone. I think he was also plotting. He was, I think it was Fred Funk who was playing the King of the Orcs. And so, so he would set up defenses. He would have like a budget, and he'd say, okay, well, I got this treasure. I want to protect this treasure in this room with these traps. I'm going to put 25 of my 300 orcs over here to protect that. And he would set it all up. And so maybe that's what they were doing. Maybe they weren't adventuring, but either way, it was just consuming all of Dave's time. And they were demanding, it's just, I mean, both of you DM or referee games?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, what you got to think of new ideas. And sometimes it's just like, I've tried this, I've tried that. Like, how am I going to come up with a new idea for these people that will surprise them? He was just wiped out. They just burned him out in about 2 years. So other people started being referees in Blackmore, and each of them would sort of have a city area that they could do their own dungeon in. And so if you wanted to go to Greg Svensson's dungeon, you would travel 60 miles from the town of Blackmore to the town of Vestfold, which at the time was called Tonisborg. And when Blackmore was published in 1977 by Judges Guild, they just changed the name to Vestfold. When I run it, I call it Fastness Fold. I have my own name for it, but I use Greg's dungeon. And so I'm rambling. Am I talking too much?
No.
Anyway,
what's in the book,
Greg,
right? What's in the
Greg,
yes.
Yeah, Greg created this dungeon. He made these maps, so that's sort of in about 73. We're not really sure where the maps come from. We can guess, but I think they come from Arneson made copies. I guess my camera's down there.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
see it.
yeah, it's
Yeah. So what you have is like, I guess that camera doesn't do very well on
well,
zooming
we
in, I
can
Yeah, the
think.
see
close-up,
it.
it's not
Yeah,
very.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
But
we can see it.
you see how convoluted and angular all those maps
Yes.
are. The maps appeared when we were doing an interview with Wesley and Ross Maker and McGarry, and McGarry was just and it's funny because we do those interviews and everybody's got a coffee mug, but the coffee mug has scotch in it. It's kind of a tradition. It's because it's relaxed time, you know. We're not going to publish anything that's said in those interviews that's bad or anything. Not that there's anything bad to say, but it's a nice time. We're all sipping scotch when the movie's going in some parts of it. But McGarry's like, "Oh, wait a minute! I got these dungeon maps in the basement," and he runs off and disappears for a couple of minutes, and then he comes back and he has these Xeroxed maps, and we're looking at them, and it's like, what is this? And he says, "I don't know. It's somebody's dungeon." And I looked at it and I saw those angles and I said, "That's a Blackmoor dungeon. There's no other dungeon that looks like that." And then on top of it, the way the doors are drawn on the maps, the Blackmoor dungeon always has the little paddle. It looks like a little like pinball paddles, you know. And so it shows you which way the door opens. So it looks open, but it's really closed. But the indicator is that it opens inward or it opens outward. That design method is Dave Arneson. And so, excuse me, I hope you guys aren't dying there. Then the next thing that came up was that there were gnolls in there. And we did all this research, and McGarry suggested, he said, "I think it's Tonisborg." Greg Zenson's Tonisborg. And so the odd thing is that we don't know. I mean, there's conjecture about where the map come from. My attitude is, if I don't have certitude, then I won't state that I know something. I'll just say I don't know. Or I'll say it is possible it is this, and it is possible it is that, but we don't know. I'm not going to tell you it's a fact. And so it's likely Arneson made Xeroxes, handed them to McGarry at some point. McGarry stuck them in some papers and didn't use them again. But when Greg Svensson and McGarry, I think it was 1982 or so, were in Boston together, McGarry was working at the law library, and so he asked Greg if he could borrow Greg's maps and go make Xeroxes. And so he went and did that. When he got home, he didn't want him to bend, so he put him in a magazine, and then he went to bed. And what he didn't realize was that the cleaning lady was coming the next day, because they had a cleaning lady where he was staying. And the cleaning lady took the magazine and threw it away. And it was the same day that the garbage man came and picked up the garbage and took it away. So, you know, he woke up, he saw the magazine missing, he went to the trash was empty, and he had to, I don't know how you tell your best friend, like, I lost all 10 levels of your dungeon that you worked on for how many hours, but he had to tell him that. And it was one of the things that kind of was one of the myths of Blackmoor. There was this Lost Dungeons of Tonisborg, and, you know, this mega dungeon, early mega dungeon that nobody had ever seen. So it was Dan Boggs who finally said, "Well, I'm just going to email the maps to Greg." I was so busy, I had never even thought to do that. I was like, "Oh yeah, I could just show it to Greg," right? So Dan mails it to Greg, and Greg says, "Yeah, that's my handwriting. That's Tonisborg Dungeon." And so it is the oldest dungeon, probably it's easily the second oldest, you know, mega dungeon in the Twin Cities from before the time of Dungeons and Dragons. And so in Lake Geneva, I don't know how many dungeons were being made there, but there's probably one or two. So it's right up there in the top, in the 4 oldest dungeons in the history of role-playing games. And so it's very revealing, because it's Greg says that Arneson gave him a set of instructions in order to generate the dungeon with die rolls. And so it's a random dungeon. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's so angular and strange. And it's so erratic. I think a lot of dungeons look almost more like they were designed by people that design suburban homes these days. They're just, everything's so tidy and organized. It's not an ancient ancient place, ancient burial place.
Yes.
It isn't like the catacombs under France. They don't go.
Yeah, they don't have a logic.
They go everywhere, right? And if you're underground, have you ever been underground in tunnels or in caves? Much?
No,
No.
Oh, it's
not
really
much.
cool. That's
Yeah.
another thing I love is when I can. They have abandoned mines in Colorado, like gold mines, and if you have like a guide that can take you in because they're dangerous as hell, it's really cool to go into a
It sounds
mine.
cool. Yeah, I
Yeah,
would like to do that. Yeah.
there's a tunnel called the Viddler Tunnel, and it was supposed to be the transcontinental tunnel underneath the Great Divide. And they didn't get it done on time, and the Moffat Tunnel got completed, so they lost all the funding. But they built that tunnel, and it's now used as a water tunnel where they just run water through it, like about knee deep water through it to get water from the west side, which is really damp, to the east side for the Front Range. And I got to walk that. It was I think it's about a 6-mile tunnel. And I don't know, it's just having that experience of being underground and that sense of like how the sound, you're splashing through water. There are relics. There was one place where they would drill holes to put the dynamite into. And there was one place where if you look down in there, you could see the piece of dynamite still in there, which is unnerving because dynamite, I know I'm starting to sound like Wesley. If you talk to Wesley, he concatenates all his knowledge and you end up spiraling off. And I'm starting to get like Wesley. I think he's just, it's like a virus. But dynamite it sweats, and when it ages, and it becomes really volatile. And it's rumored that a piece of dynamite that's extremely volatile in a dark cave somewhere could even be set off by just a bright light. So I don't know. It's a cool myth though. But yeah, so these I don't know, the Tonisborg and Blackmoor dungeon look like real catacombs. If you've looked at a lot of even the Egyptian tombs, they don't really, they have weird angles that go all over. So and we got, this is Ken Fletcher's art, the dragon on the cover. Ken he did this one in 1979. Ken was played, and actually what's interesting about Ken, this is something from the next movie, which I kept out of the movie, but Dave Arneson ran a war game where he introduced kind of a sci-fi element. And so it was the Romans versus the Druids and the like the Welsh tribal people. And McGarry was playing the Druid, and he gave McGarry a little slip of paper, and he had drawn on it what looked like a Star Trek hand phaser, got like the gun ones from the original Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he is like, you have this thing and you can use it when you want to use it. So Pete Gaylord, who's playing the Romans, charges his elephant up, and McGarry zaps the elephant and it disappears. He just fries the elephant, right? And but that was, Ken Fletcher says that Dave Arneson told him that was the first time he did anything that wasn't completely historical. It was the first time so in a sense, that's kind of like, it could be considered the germination of Blackmoor right at that point in that game. And then Ken Fletcher ended up working at Adventure Games, which is Arneson's game company. So we have these drawings. The art is cool. I mean, I did some of the art because we had a problem with the artist, which was I won't go into that. It makes me sad. We had Bob Bledsaw lined up, who was Judges Guild, which would have been like, as far as a lineage, since he drew a lot of the art that was in the first fantasy campaign module in 1977. To have him do this would have been really cool, because it would have kind of brought it full circle. Mm-hmm. For Blackmoor type things. But trying to find one of Ken Fletcher's other drawings, just because Ken's are interesting. There's one in here he did in 1974. So it's right when D&D came out. But we also had, we went through a lot of effort to make it a usable book for somebody today. So the maps, the hand-drawn maps are a little difficult. I played for about 2 or 3 years with the hand-drawn ones, and it was really hard to read them because they're nonsensical. It's like you've discovered this place that follows an alien logic that you don't understand. And there are stairways everywhere. And so you can be on the first level and you can find a stairwell and you say, well, yeah, we'll go down to the third, the second level. So you take the stairwell from the first to the second level, but what you don't know is that now you're down on the fourth level. So you're wandering around the fourth level, and it's really weird because the monsters are really tough down here. So you go running up a hallway and you find another stairwell and you're like, we'll take this one. And oh, great. Now we're on the seventh level of the dungeon. And so you could almost turn it sideways, and it's as many stairwells going through. Here's a good example of how many, I think it's either 7 or 6 has the most connecting stairwells up and down. And so, yeah, here's level 6. Okay. So there's level 6, but if you look at the bottom, these are all letter combinations that refer to stairwells, and number combinations that refer to levels.
Was there more information, or just from the original maps? Did they have some description?
Oh yeah, well,
the encounters and all that.
Well, see, in the old days, I don't know how a lot of dungeon masters do it, but people started reading modules, and modules are designed as product, and so the descriptions are very detailed. And it's why I can't run modules, because I start to read a description and I'm just like, I forget what I read. And I don't want to sit there and read a story out of a book to somebody as a game, because that's not a game. So in the old days, we would really just, and I've seen pictures of Gary Gygax running his dungeon, and he's got a map in front of him and a key for the level, the room description. And all it is a number and a monster and a treasure. And there's nothing else there, but he knows when he wrote that number down, and by the shape of the room, he remembers, oh yeah, that's the room with the skeletons, and the treasure is actually hidden in an alcove that's in the wall, but it's not drawn on the map. I remember when I thought of that, and there are poison darts to protect it or whatever. We kind of use mnemonic devices to remember those things. And so if you look at Greg Svensson's key, it follows the same. The level 10, this was something that got separated. We didn't have it for a long time, but it's just a number and then a monster and a treasure. Okay. And he knows what these things are. There are little notes on his maps. There are little side notes here and there. And then on the page itself, like room 15, right above the word vampire, there's a little tiny smaller writing, and it says crypt. So we know this is a type of tomb, and this is where so obviously if this is a crypt and there's a vampire there, this is the vampire's lair, right? We can infer that. And there are other ones in other rooms that are like, they'll say like bedroom or laboratory or something like that. Probably the most significant thing we found out with this dungeon was that while Gary and Dave were doing sort of sandbox dungeons, we're just like, we're going to go to the dungeon, we're going to go in there, we're going to explore, we're going to find what's there and fight or flee or talk to what's there, and then we're going to leave, and hopefully won't be dead, and we'll have treasure, right? That's kind of the old school dungeoneering approach. Greg put these things in there that are sort of a precursor to the video game sort of, their video games always, you finish the level and you get the sword, or you get the orb, or you finish the 50 levels and you get the scepter, And so in the bottom level of the dungeon are 3 rooms that have the crowns of power. And these are these magic crowns. It's not defined what they do. He has his own little rule that he devised that is interesting, because it's a stat roll, which you don't see that in early D&D. I think that they use stat rolls as challenges for things, and they would modify the difficulty. So like, I want to do something dexterous, but then it's like, yeah, but the thing you're doing is hard, so you're going to have to take a -4, or a +4 penalty on your die roll. Roll a d20 +4 and try to get under your dexterity. Something really simple like that as a rule, right? And so the crowns of power are down in there, which is it's just a paper D&D precursor to the computer dungeon game thing that you see. And then Dan's kind of archival one about he just lodges stuff in his brain and it comes out later. I'm more concept oriented. He's fact oriented. And he said, "Oh, I know what that's from." And I said, it's mentioned in one sentence in the third booklet of the original Dungeons and Dragons, and then it's brought back up in I think the artifacts in volume 3, supplement 3, I think. Eldritch Wizardry has all the artifacts, I think. And so it appears in that book as well. How familiar are you? I mean, are you guys very familiar with the original D&D, the little books?
Well, I played the red box set.
Okay.
That was my introduction into D&D, but well, that's all. I didn't play it that much because soon after that I started playing the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So
okay, yeah.
So no, not familiar.
It's convoluted because it's really hard to interpret the rules because they have the original game, which is already about as obtuse as you can get. They're using in the original rules, like the word hit dice, and is it a roll to hit something, or is it a roll for the damage that you take? Or, I mean, there's like terms like that that are never defined in the rules, and you have to figure out what they mean with the same term by the context. And then they decide, well, we released the game too early, obviously, but we needed to get something out to start selling it and get traction in the market. And so it's incomplete. So we're going to release these supplements. And so you have these supplemental books, but a lot of the rules in the supplemental books might be 2 sentences that are buried somewhere. And then cover your ears. Excuse me. And then on top of that, because they were so bad at editing, everything they released would have a last page, which was the corrections page. And so like I had been playing Dungeons and Dragons for maybe 2 or 3 years before I realized that you could, in the original game, you could pay 2,000 gold pieces to create a little familiar that was called a homunculus as a wizard. It's because it was in the corrections page. It wasn't in the main body of the text. And nobody else had played
to some games today.
Well,
yeah.
With me, it always happened because I have a bad memory, so
right.
I never memorized the rules. And when I started playing, I just said, "Screw it,
let's do it." You just play, right? But well, it was really bad then. It's still bad, I guess, in some rules. But yeah, I forgot where I was going with that. But D&D is just a convoluted. It's just a mess. You know, it's a disaster. It was a disaster in the beginning. Every edition they come out with is a disaster. And what makes it the delightful thing it is just the play method of this verbal exchange of like, okay, I'm gonna go down the passage. Okay, you're going down the passage. You notice that there's a lot of moisture and maybe there's moss growing on the walls here. And if you look closely, you might see some strange mushrooms, and under the light, they're a little bit purple. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to touch anything purple because that just doesn't sound good. I'm going to keep going. Okay, well, there's fog coming down the passage, and the fog is getting thicker and thicker. And like, okay, well, we're going to light more torches just because it's so damp down here. I mean, that's this exchange. You keep going, and you're creating the story of being down in the dungeon.
So you really like dungeons?
What?
You are really into dungeons. I was never.
I think it's the most compelling thing that came out of Dungeons and Dragons was the dungeon setting. Arneson himself said that he spent the afternoon watching horror movies. Okay, so he was watching in that time period. It would have been really bad, like Japanese monster movies, something like The Blob, like 50s sci-fi American pulp, and American sort of gothic horror films. And so when you look at Blackmoor, what you see is this mishmash of gothic horror, weird pulp sci-fi, and this medieval fantasy stuff that comes from, some of it comes from Conan and some of it comes from Lord of the Rings. But I think that when people run their dungeons, there's this real, the whole tendency to want to be safe and not get triggered and all that. It's like, like, that's nice, but you shouldn't be playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons with me. Because my whole goal is to trigger you. I want you to, I want to take you down in there, and I want to, I'll ask my players, okay, everybody close their eyes, and I'm going to describe the setting that we're in before we start to play. And I'll go through the history of Blackmore, and I'll pitch my voice a little like this, and I'll slow down, and everybody will be quiet, and we will relax. Everybody's feeling calm. I do stuff like that. It's the dungeon master's job is to do a psych job on the players. And, even down to the point of, are you sure you want to do that? Have you done that to players?
Yeah, that's the golden question.
Yeah, I'm going to open the door. Are you sure you want to do that?
And we're like, you froze.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to, but now I'm not sure. Are you
No,
telling
I'm
me I'm not
it.
supposed to do that? I don't know, right? It's up to you.
So I think that it's important to keep that sort of element of horror in there, and that we can agree. I buy into the whole idea of consent. The consent comes with Griff is going to run a really scary ass dungeon, and people's limbs are going to get torn off, and you're going to have spiders and snakes and just spears coming out of holes in the walls and impaling people and guts everywhere. If you're okay with that, you can consent to that, and all bets are off, and we're getting on the roller. It's like getting on the roller coaster where you don't know what it's going to do. It's just like a line. You've bought your ticket. I guess I'm going to ride the roller coaster. Those
consents.
It's like
the consent things are stupid. For example, I don't like spiders. I'm arachnophobic. But you can speak about spiders, and you can describe an attack with spiders. I won't get. I want to be afraid of that. Thing is different from having a spider here. That's what I'm afraid of. If there was a big ugly spider on my table, I would be afraid. But
if I'm there, I will get a glass and a piece of paper, and I will just.
I think I've seen some photographs, some pictures of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Black Widows that I had.
I wouldn't.
It was on me.
No.
It crawled across my hand.
Yeah, that's the no.
Yeah.
The description doesn't do anything, but. If it happened, I wouldn't go get the glass. I would just, I don't know. I would probably freeze.
Yeah. Well, the trick is to just be calm. They're not evil. They don't want to do anything evil to you. It's when I don't know. I won't go there. But anyway, the consent thing. It's just like, if you play with me, sure, we have consent. It's going to be bad. Do you consent to play a game with me? I'm not going to change anything in my game because I spent all week preparing this scary ass adventure for you guys, and I want to give you the most intense ride you can get out of it. And so if you suddenly, like, you're telling me that you don't like spiders, and you're telling me you don't like places that are damp, and you're telling me you don't like foggy places, and it's just like, okay,
a weird list of things.
Shopping mall. We're in we're in Kmart. And the lights are bright, and there's nobody else in here because other people are scary and cause anxiety. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
That's why they end up creating adventures about being baristas.
Yeah. Oh God, I can't tell. Is that a joke, or is it intended as a joke?
This was my
kind of a joke, I think. Kind of a joke, but not really a joke, because
but it's not that funny.
That's it. It's not funny.
It's just lame. So it's like,
unless they are trying to joke about themselves. That's the only funny thing here, is that I can see these guys playing this thing.
Was it made by Wizards? Or was it just somebody submitted it?
I'm not sure. Probably that's it. Probably it's a free. It's a free adventure, so it's published on their site, but I think someone just did it.
See, I have a better sense of humor than they do. So. But it's also a really tasteless and politically incorrect sense of humor. So I can't publish my bad joke dungeons because I would be banished from the planet. I would just explode, and
you'd probably
collective hatred for Griff would make me explode. And I'd
just be canceled.
Yeah,
just canceled.
See, I want to cancel them because I was a barista, and I'm a working class schmuck, right? And they're making fun of baristas. And so that's very classist of them, and they never talk about classism, and I'm really concerned about my status. I'm down here in society. I make the coffee for everybody. But without me down here in society making the coffee for everybody, society comes to a grinding halt. And so they should be canceled for making fun of baristas.
All the woke stuff.
I'm smiling while I say this. I don't really mean it. Okay, it's just a joke. It's a joke. You don't have to cancel me. Anyway, what else are we going to talk about? I kind of ramble and ramble.
I'm
How
not
long
sure.
have we been talking? Am I
About an hour,
interesting at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So far,
Yes,
okay.
yes. We are more aware of the history of
Yeah, that was interesting.
role playing.
So yeah, we talked about the movie. We talked about
About the
Tonisborg. We
book.
Yes.
talked about.
The book is
Did-
coming next month. Is
Exactly.
that
We
so?
didn't mention
Have I
that.
shown you my guitar pedals?
Not yet.
See, I'm really into synthesizers. I have been since like I think it was like 1980. I bought a really crappy Korg synthesizer with all these knobs when I was a teenager, and I was in all these like little goth bands with my friends as a teenager. And so I got back into it recently, and I found this Chinese company that makes these knockoff pedals. Their graphics just are horrible on them. Like there are these little waves on this. It's supposed to be a reverb pedal. So I wrote them a letter and I said, all right, I bought one, and on the eBay thing, they wrote back and said, the art on the one you want, the photo is not the same thing you think you're buying. Do you want the one in the photo or the thing that it's supposed to be? And I said, I'll take the one in the photo because it's sort of interesting, but can I talk to your sales department too? And they said, sure, you can talk to our sales department. So I sent the guy in their sales department some of my little dragon drawings that I do when I'm just doodling. And I said, you know, your pedals are cool, but you'd sell a lot more if they had better art. And so the one, well, here's the reverb with the waves. Here's the reverb with the dragon.
Yeah.
It's much better.
And so I just said, I'll just draw all the art on all your pedals, and you guys can have some really kick-ass pedals for your guitar effect pedals, or in my case, synthesizer effect pedals. And so I just did this for free because I wanted to have my own product line with my art on it. It's kind of my little, I like to play games like that. It's like, how many people can say like, I have a whole product line that has my art on it. They didn't pay me a penny for it, but I can still say, this is me. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like the whole Chris and I we like to do cool things. We just do stupid stuff like that all the time. What else did you want to talk about? There must be something else.
Any more documentary projects after this one?
Right now, what am I doing? I'm working on music stuff. I have this, I'm sort of reliving my teen years. Like some people buy a Maserati when they have a midlife crisis. And I'm in my midlife crisis. So I got a hold of my best friend from when I was 16, and we have this synth band that's going to be D&D themed. Like one of the songs is called I Killed Your Character. And it's like all boopy synth music. And it's all about, I killed your character, but I actually don't feel bad because it was really fun. And I want to do it
you had
again.
mentioned you were doing something for role-playing games. Is that
and then the other one is the ambient
effects
stuff. And you can find
yeah.
that online. And so I'm doing all of that under the Synth-Lord. I have this really long name. It's like, I keep adding words. It's like the Sparkle Dice, middle-aged, lich synth lords of I forgot how it all goes together. It's something about middle-aged sexual darkness and kind of mocking ourselves for being old. And so I'm doing that stuff. And then I'm also have another movie script I want to work on for a science fiction movie that I'm kind of doing secretly. And then, I mean, I'm doing a lot of stuff, you know, but it moves slowly. You get a lot of projects and you just make a little bit of baby steps on everything. And then after like 10 years, suddenly everything is ready to happen, you know, or 5 years, everything's ready to happen. I'm going to write another Blackmoor book. A lot of people want to know how to run a game in Blackmoor. And so I'm going to do, it's called the Essential Blackmore. It's just essential information for running a Blackmoor campaign.
Yeah, that's something I'm going to ask. Is the Blackmoor campaign on print right now or no?
Well, there are a couple products. There's the supplement that came out with D&D as a supplement 2, and it has it's the first D&D scenario like module, which is the Temple of the Frog, and that was sort of a collaboration between Dave Arneson and Steve Rockford, who I don't know, Rockford's probably like the oldest gay D&D player in the history of the game, you know, and he's a great guy, and a brutal wargamer. Like, he'll just tear you apart. He doesn't fit the stereotype, let's just say that. He's very masculine in a lot of ways, which is fine. I'm not making any judgments. We're safe here. Then there was, when Arneson split up with Gary Gygax, he did a thing called the First Fantasy Campaign. And that, what's interesting about that is that it really isn't written. It's just, he handed over all of his notes, and Bledsaw, not really knowing what he was getting, just assumed it was a manuscript, and he just published it kind of as is. And so it's this meandering collection of notes that are the original notes from the very first fantasy campaign. And then they took his original map and they kind of expanded it a bit, made it look a lot prettier. And so there's a big fold out map of Blackmoor, which is really cool, that comes with that. It's hard to find. Then, I mean, this is a whole thing. Everybody says, oh, Gary and Dave hated each other, right? Well, in 1985 or so, Gary Gygax, I mean, he must have flown out to see Dave. He goes out to California to visit Dave Arneson, and goes to Arneson's house and has dinner with Arneson and his daughter and his wife, which, if you hate the guy, what's he doing in your house eating dinner with your family, right? And Gary says, why don't you come back to TSR and do some modules? And so he did, I think it was 4 modules, and there was supposed to be 1 more module, which is sort of like the missing, it's another one of those missing module things, which I will tell you that I may or may not have access to those resources to put into my Blackmoor book. Anyway, so that's, I mean, that's my whole thing, is find old things and publish them and let people use them. And then after that, before Dave died, he got together with a guy named Dustin Klingman, and they wrote a book called The World of Blackmoor, which is, I think, for 3E. And I think most of that, I've seen I have a lot of the notes from email files that I got from, I have like disk drives that were Dave Arneson's. And so looking at the notes, it seems pretty clear that it's not really Dave Arneson's vision, and that like the world map is his vision. Some of the character names are his vision, but a lot of that is somebody else's work. So I don't really consider that to be Blackmoor. I know Dave was proud of it because it was a way to get his name out there. But I don't think it's very much like a pure, true Blackmoor. And then, I mean, we have other things too, like when we archived, Dave Arneson produced so much material that more material has probably been lost than still exists, and what exists is just monumental. And so of the stuff that the family still had, they had a flood and they just had to just throw things. It just turned to pulp. It was just water and paper, and they just threw it away. And it makes me cry. I would have had it in the page by page. I would have taken it apart, but that's because I'm an idiot. But mixed in with that, there's a whole role-playing game for gangster game, right? For 1920s gangsters. It's a different system. It has 7 attributes instead of 6 like D&D. We have all of that, even all the development notes. And so it'd be interesting to publish that as sort of instead of redoing the manuscript, publish it as a game with sort of insider information. Some of these letters of people saying like, well, people are saying this and they're saying that, sort of as a way for, if you're interested in game design, which everybody is, you can sort of get a little sneak peek at what was going on in game design around the 80s, you know. What else? I mean, we've got other games by other designers too that we're going to publish. Kriegzug, I want to do a war game. Everybody who sees the movie gets curious about miniatures wargaming. And so I think that we should maybe have something in our catalog that's very representative of the style of wargaming that would have been done by the Blackmoor bunch. And 2 of the guys, the Belfry brothers, Dave and Scott Belfry, have designed their own 7 Years' War, like Frederick the Great in Prussia time period. And it turns out that some of the design actually was based on ideas that Dave Arneson suggested to them. like they said, yeah, the fog of war element that's in there. There's a set of cards you draw that give you like little sneaky things you can do during the game. Like you can bring on troops that were hidden or whatever. That was really suggested by Dave Arneson. They implemented it, but Arneson said you need this fog of war element. And so one of the things I'd like to do for the war game book is to also include other artifacts from early on and sort of have an appendix, kind of like, you know, the Tonisborg book. We have everything in here is new. The only thing that's old is these some of the art and these artifacts and these maps in the Tonisborg book. And it's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, everybody's got to pitch their product, but I think it's a very nice book. It's like a coffee table book. Like you leave this out,
yes,
and somebody will turn to the maps and they'll be like, "What is this?" You know, it'll create interest. And so with the war game book, I'd like to have a section of resources that relate to the predecessor war games. So I talked to Wesley, and he's really open to the idea of us republishing his Strategos N rules. And then there were variants off of Strategos N that were created in the Twin Cities, the Ancients version, Strategos A, the Civil War version, Strategos C, and the Russo-Turkish War, Strategos RT. And so, you know, we could have like a whole other rule system in the back of the book that's from the 60s. So when you read the book, because I want to create sort of a very contextual sort of walk through the history of why wargaming could be almost like role playing. And so, yeah, that's just some of the stuff I'm into doing. We got a lot of stuff that we got to work on, but it's always like, I'm really lazy, you know, it's like, it takes me forever to get in.
But there's a lot of projects then.
Yeah, it keeps me busy, you know.
And there's a lot of interest now in the ancient role playing,
old school gaming.
the old school guys. I think
there?
so. Well, I'm not really sure, but I think the most of the old school guys are interested in the older editions of games. I know a couple of people were. I think they are. As time goes by, they are more interested in the older stuff, in the first edition or second or something.
I do, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I hope so. That's the thing. We get into, I am horrible because when people on the internet get aggressive with me, I do this Tai Chi thing and I taunt them and they don't know I'm taunting them, and I kind of drag. It's like you set the hook, right? And you just reel them in. And but really, we should just be having fun doing all this stuff and not be jumping all over each other.
Yeah.
Fun is that I don't think so. There's not much fun.
That's what we should be doing.
Not on Twitter, no.
Yeah, Twitter is just a horrible flaming
it's
dumpster.
A cesspool.
It is a cesspool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, my goal, like I've been doing, like I said, I do those impromptu games where I just say I'm going to run a game. We're playing original Dungeons and Dragons. People are like, oh, I don't know how to play. It's like, do you know how to deal with reality? Just tell me what you want to do and I'll tell you what happens. That's how we play in the old way. You don't need any rules, just roll some dice. Okay, those are your stats. What am I? Right now you're a fighter. Let's just leave it at that, Maybe later we'll find a magic wand and figure out who knows how to use it or something. We can evolve it in the game. So yeah, I really want to get people kind of focused more on that. You're talking about people want to find these older games. There's a range, there's a scope, if you go from, even in the early days, like by 79, we had probably the most rules oriented game was In the Labyrinth, and it was hex maps and you'd go in the dungeon, but you were moving your miniatures and it was very specific. You could move these many hexes in a turn if you have this much encumbrance, and you can do this many actions in a turn. It's very, where are you facing? It's very detailed, even though it's a very minimalistic system. But out of those two, there's sort of those two poles of, you have the just make-believe game, imaginary make-believe game of original Dungeons and Dragons, and then you have something like In the Labyrinth, which is very specific. but there's also a lot of space in the middle to play with where you're getting a little bit of both. And I think every referee finds what their preference, or even a game group will develop a flavor, of what how they like to play. Do they want a lot of miniatures or not? Things like that. But my big thing is just trying to get it out there that, like, yeah, you can, you don't need a lot to play these games, and they can be incredibly immersive and fun to do. And you don't have to give all your money to a giant corporation that doesn't give a snot about you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hasbro doesn't need your money.
No, they really don't. They already got it. They got their money. Well, and it's not even really going to the designers, it's just going to the company. It's going to a CEO. Like there's somebody there that makes millions of dollars off of you buying game modules that has never even played the game. They're just a business person. There are rooms full of lawyers that are just waiting. They just get paid to sit in a room until they release them like dogs after somebody, whereas like the indies, that's why I'm all about the indies. People should just check out the indies.
But they don't, right?
What's that?
They don't usually. It's difficult for independent game designers to get their products out, and well, the rich people who never buy independent games. 2 years ago,
Right.
I had never, or probably never, bought an independent game. I wasn't playing the biggest games, but I was playing those intermediate games who are commercial still. So,
well, is it the marketing? I mean, like the OSR. I talked to one Dan Boggs, who wrote Tonisborg with me, and I was like, why is it that the OSR is so hated? And then he explained that there was a guy when the OSR started, some jerk somewhere created some like Nazi game, right? And it's like, yeah, I don't want to be. I don't want any of that.
Varg Vikernes, is that one? That guy?
Was he the guy that created it? Was that him?
There was I think he's Swedish or something.
Or yeah, whatever. European. Somebody created something like really repulsive, It
was fantasy,
I think.
Right?
What's that?
A fantasy game, right?
Well, it was something, it was just something really tasteless and vulgar. But because it had the OSR tag, everybody says, all OSR is horrible and bad for you. And so that's another thing why I'm like, I don't call it OSR anymore, and I'm not part of the OSR, because people have these real strict ideas of what that is. I just refer to what I do as traditional role playing, and or a retro RPG as what I call it too, and which is a very broad term. It's just like whatever we were doing in 1977 to 1985, maybe, in that time frame of role playing games. Yeah, it's just like, we're just going back to traditional role playing, less rules. I think have you ever heard me talk about when I talked to Jeff Barry, I repeat a lot of my stories, but they're so awesome. He was just talking about how when he was, Jeff Barry was an associate of Phil Barker, Empire of the Petal Throne. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, I play these role-playing games now, and I have to roll on a chart to decide whether I like the caviar when I eat the caviar, right? And it's like, I can't just say my character likes caviar. No, I have to find the caviar tasting and pleasing chart, and it's like, yeah, it's just it's your character. Does your character like caviar or not? You don't need to do all this stupid crap. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit.
No problem.
Should we call it a day or a night, or?
Yeah, perhaps.
I'm getting a little bit long.
I know. I
can't be absolutely sure because Zoom meetings don't have the timing. So
yeah, they don't. Well,
I have to look at the clock.
When we started roughly.
Yeah, it was 7:30. Well, here it was 7:30.
It's been about 90 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, probably.
I could go another half an hour.
I think most of our interviews have run around 1 hour and a half.
Yeah.
Because don't worry. Okay. Yeah, more or less.
And then
people just talk and talk. Exactly.
It gets kind of rambly. All right. I was just trying to think if there was anything else I needed to talk about. I hate to get into all the political stuff, it's just, I'm not interested in that. I want to do some gaming, damn it. Like I want to play some more games, maybe a little bit of RPG, but really wargaming is my big focus. Do you guys do any wargaming at all, or are you just RPGers?
No, I was always, since the beginning, a role player, never wargamer.
Sylvia?
No, I played the closest thing I played with a war game. It's I don't know, I have no idea how it's called. Risco.
Risk.
Risk.
Oh, Risk, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
That's tedious.
But that's
though.
very basic. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It's tedious.
See, more people need to try war games, but it's like you have to get a good war game, and it's hard to find a good war game. And you need to find somebody that has like all the little soldiers that invites you over, and you're like moving masses of troops all over, and it takes like 10 hours, you know. So you stop in the middle for a long dinner break or something, just like a real war. Like you figure in like a real war, you're riding your horses around for 4 hours. You've got your guys show up and they set up the tent and they bring out the coffee, and people are killing each other over there, but you're just like, you know, I'm sore from riding my horse, and then you go do the real war thing. All right, I'll just shut up now. We can call it a good show.
Okay.
On that note, have fun gaming, guys.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
Sure.
And
sure.
maybe we can another day talk about something else.
Tell people to buy millions of copies of the Tonisborg
Yes.
book. Oh yeah, and it's on the Secrets of Blackmore website. Yeah,
I'll put
millions
a
of
link.
copies.
I'll put a link for your site and something else. I'll have to check the video if there's something else.
This funds my other habits, you know.
Yeah.
So if you buy this book, I get to buy other things and fulfill my secret desires for other things.
So yeah, you need to sell a lot of books. Yeah. Right. Okay then. Thank you
Ciao,
for
guys.
coming.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.